I inherited a house with no mirrors, then my reflection tried to replace me. Reddit stories. They say the past clings to old houses like ivy, creeping into cracks, rooting into the grain of wood and the silence of corners. Ours was such a house, a squat, aging structure perched at the edge of a forgotten town, with its shutters forever half closed as though shielding the eyes of the house from what it had seen. I grew up inside those dim walls, under a roof heavy with secrets and a lineage that seemed carved in sorrow. My name is Rachel, and what I'm about to tell you isn't just a story of family. It's a confession buried beneath generations, a bloodstain scrubbed raw but never gone. It starts with my grandmother, Leela, who inherited the house from her mother, just as I would one day inherit it from her. They called her a widow, though no one remembered a funeral or saw a grave. She kept no pictures, never spoke of her husband. What she did keep was a curious habit. There were no mirrors in the house, not one. Not in the hallways, not in the bathroom, not in the bedroom where her ghost-like presence seemed to dissolve into the wallpaper. When I asked her about it as a child, she'd fix her eyes on mine and say, "We don't need to see what watches back." It sounded like madness then, but now I'm not so sure. By the time I was born, the house had already taken its toll. My mother, Eleanor, returned to it like a moth to flame after her divorce, dragging me behind her with a suitcase full of resentment. She never liked the house, always said it smelled of old milk and forgotten prayers. Still, she stayed, like all the women in our family did, drawn back as if by some silent vow etched in bone. She tried to brighten the rooms, buying floral curtains, painting the living room yellow, even sneaking in a small hand mirror she hid in a drawer. Lila found it and shattered it that very night, leaving its shards on the porch like a warning. I remember how she looked at my mother afterward. No anger, no words, just disappointment so sharp it could slice you open. As for me, I grew up cautious. You learn to read silence when you grow up among women who speak in glances and hold their grief like a secret language. There were rules in that house, unspoken but ironclad. You don't ask about the past. You don't open the attic. You don't bring strangers home. Most importantly, you don't question the way things are, especially not when it comes to family. I obeyed them, even when I didn't understand. I learned to move quietly, to disappear in plain sight. I learned that love in our family was not something given freely, but earned through loyalty, through silence, through endurance. As I grew older, I began to notice things, small things at first. The way Lila's shadow seemed to move a second too late, how her reflection never appeared in the glass of the oven door, how birds would stop singing when she entered the garden. I told myself it was imagination, the overactive mind of a lonely child. But when Leela died, the house grew colder in a way that heat couldn't fix. Her funeral was brief, almost mechanical. No one cried. My mother barely whispered the eulogy. But something shifted that day, something subtle and sharp, like the turning of a key in a lock that had rusted shut for decades. I inherited the house. I was barely 24, fresh out of college, trying to build a life that didn't resemble the quiet decay of my childhood. But the house, well, it called me back. My mother refused to live there again. She left town and cut off all contact, said she needed air, space, freedom. I never blamed her, yet I returned, telling myself it was temporary. I'd fix it up, sell it, start anew. But you can't sell something that owns you. The moment I stepped inside, I felt the weight settle over me like a veil. The air was thick with memory and mold. The walls whispered with every shift of wood. And the mirrors. I tried to bring one in, just to hang above the bathroom sink. It cracked as I unwrapped it. Hairline fractures spidering across the surface like it had aged decades in an instant. That's when I stopped trying. Still, life continued. I worked from home, took up gardening to fill the endless hours. I kept the house clean, spoke aloud to no one in particular, as if someone might be listening. And then, one morning, while clearing out the attic against every instinct I had, I found a box. It was sealed tight, bound with twine so old it flaked in my hands. Inside were photographs. Old, Brittle things yellowed with time. Most were of the house, the garden, an unfamiliar man standing in the background with a face that was always just slightly blurred. But what chilled me was the one of Lila, holding a child I didn't recognize. It wasn't my mother, it wasn't me, and Lila's expression. God, it was serene, almost radiant. But her eyes, they looked directly at the camera, and it felt like she was staring straight into me. The more I looked through the box, the more questions surfaced. Letters written in a script I didn't recognize. A birth certificate for someone named Clara, dated decades before my mother was born. A newspaper clipping about a child who vanished from the property in 1946. I felt something cracking open inside me, some dam of denial breaking loose. I tried calling my mother. No answer. I sent emails, messages. Nothing. It was as if she'd disappeared entirely. That's when the dreams began. They weren't dreams in the normal sense. I'd wake up not knowing I had fallen asleep, sweating, the sheets twisted, with the metallic taste of fear on my tongue. The house would feel wrong. Tilted somehow, as if it had been rearranged subtly while I wasn't looking. I'd hear footsteps on the stairs, whispers in the vents. Once I found the front door wide open at dawn, the earth beneath the porch freshly turned. The worst part? Each time I looked in a reflective surface, water glass, the dark screen of my phone, I saw someone standing behind me, just out of reach. I stopped sleeping. I began combing through old town records, digging into my family history with an obsession I couldn't explain. What I found made no sense. Clara, the child from the photograph, had never officially existed. No school records, no medical files. But there were mentions in journals, letters from neighbors to each other speaking in veiled terms about the girl up the hill who didn't cast a reflection. One entry stood out. A dusty old librarian's diary that read, "The bloodline continues. They keep her hidden, but she sees. She always sees." It was around this time that I began to remember things I didn't know I'd forgotten. Moments from childhood. A locked basement door I never questioned, voices humming lullabies through the floorboards, the way Lila would sometimes touch my cheek and say, "You're not like her, you're better." At the time, I thought it was a compliment. Now, I wasn't so sure. Because what if Hor wasn't my mother? There's more. So much more. And I'll tell you. But you need to understand, this wasn't just a story about a strange house or a fractured family. It was a story about inheritance. Not just of things or property, but of roles, of silence, of secrets so old they've outlived their names. The truth isn't in the attic or the basement or the whispers at night. The truth is in the mirror I was never allowed to see. And what I finally saw when I found a way to look changed everything. It started with a crack. Not in a wall or a mirror this time, but in me. Something fractured the moment I found that hidden photograph, and though I tried to resume my days, watering plants, checking emails, organizing the pantry, it was all just distraction. Every creak in the floorboards, every gust of wind through the chimney felt like a whisper meant for me. The house had always been quiet, but now it was watching. It knew I was digging. It knew I had started to remember. I became obsessed with the idea of reflection. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, but literal, physical reflection. Why had Lila forbidden mirrors? Why did glass crack in my presence? What was the real purpose of that strange superstition passed down through the women in our family? I couldn't let it go. I scoured every surface in the house, searching for even a sliver of anything that might show my reflection. But the oven door had been replaced with matte metal years ago. The windows were clouded, dust-frosted, diffusing everything beyond recognition. Even the water in the tub stilled into a dark shimmer that never seemed to ripple correctly. It was like the house had been sealed not just to keep something out, but to trap something in. I knew I had to see myself, not in the abstract, not in metaphor. I needed proof that I was real, that I was whole, that whatever I feared didn't live inside my skin. So I left the house. It was the first time in weeks. I drove to the nearest antique store, 20 miles out, run by a woman who looked at me like she'd seen me before, though I'd never been there. She never spoke as I picked a small, tarnished silver mirror from a shelf. Just wrapped it in newspaper, careful hands trembling as she handed it to me. I didn't think much of it at the time. I should have. Back home, I waited until night. It had to be dark, no distractions, no sunlight glare to distort the image. I took the mirror into the bathroom and shut the door, locking it despite being alone. My heart was pounding. I felt ridiculous, terrified, but determined. I sat on the edge of the tub and slowly unwrapped the mirror. The paper came off too easily, like the glass wanted to be seen again. At first, nothing happened. Just my face, pale drawn, my eyes too wide. I stared, exhaled, almost laughed. It was just me. But then, I blinked. And my reflection didn't. I froze. My breath caught. The image was still, watching me with a depth that didn't match my motion. I tilted my head. It didn't. Instead, it smiled. I dropped the mirror, screamed, backed into the wall so hard I knocked over the towel rack. The glass didn't shatter. It didn't even chip. It just lay there, face up, the reflection still smiling. I grabbed a towel, flung it over the glass, and locked it in the hall closet. That night, I didn't sleep. But I remembered. I remembered everything. The basement. Of course. That was where the nightmares came from. Not the attic like I'd believed, but the door I'd always passed without interest, the one Lila kept padlocked. I never questioned it, but now I saw her in my memory, younger, holding a baby in her arms in front of that door. Whispering things, crooning lullabies in a language I didn't recognize. The lullabies that still echoed sometimes through the vents. That door wasn't locked to keep us out. It was locked to keep her in. I dug through the tool closet for the bolt cutters. The lock was rusted, ancient, but it snapped with a satisfying crunch. The door groaned as I pulled it open, and a cold rush of air, stale and coppery, met me. I flicked on the light. The bulb above the stairs blinked, then glowed. The steps creaked under my weight as I descended. The basement wasn't what I expected. It wasn't dusty or cluttered. It was clean. Too clean. Sterile even. The walls were bare, but the floor had been painted into a strange circular pattern, some kind of sigil I didn't recognize. At the center stood a chair, just a plain wooden chair, but something about it felt wrong, as though it had a purpose beyond sitting. And on the wall across from it was a mirror, a massive one, full length, untouched by time, its surface gleaming in the dim light. My breath caught again, because unlike before, this time I saw her, not me. She looked like me. She was me. But not exactly. Her hair was slightly longer, her eyes darker, her smile broader. She looked confident, beautiful even. But empty. Hollow. And as I watched, she lifted her hand in the mirror and placed it on the glass. I felt heat surge in my palm. I hadn't moved. I couldn't move. Then she whispered. No, not aloud, but directly into my mind. You remember me now. The mirror cracked. Just a thin fissure down the middle. I stumbled back, tripped, fell to the floor. When I looked again, she was gone. Just my own horrified reflection staring back at me, pale and trembling. I ran. I fled up the stairs, slammed the basement door, and shoved furniture against it. Whatever I had seen, whatever I had remembered, it wasn't over. The next few days blurred. I tried to convince myself it had been a hallucination. Stress, sleep deprivation, trauma resurfacing in fantastical form. But the house wouldn't let me forget. Things moved when I wasn't looking. The kitchen faucet turned on by itself. The clock hands spun backwards. I found pages of a journal on the kitchen table I didn't remember writing, in my own handwriting. They described events that hadn't happened yet. Or maybe they had. Maybe I hadn't happened. And then the calls started. Not phone calls, reflections, screens, windows. Any surface that could reflect light. I'd see her face flicker in my laptop screen when it was off. Her fingers drumming on the inside of the microwave door. Her eyes watching from the spoon I dropped in the sink. I smashed every object that reflected. Every last one. But still she found a way. That's when my mother called. I don't know how she knew, but her voice was raw, shaking, like she hadn't slept in months. She said 3 words. Don't let her out." Then she hung up. I tried calling back. Nothing. Dead line. But the message was enough. That night, I returned to the basement. The mirror was whole again, but she was waiting. And this time, she wasn't content to smile. She spoke. Clear. Cold. Final. "You are the reflection." My knees buckled. I clutched the doorway. My memories, the ones I trusted, flashed like static. Was I ever born outside this house? Was I ever anything but her? Had Lila locked someone in the mirror or pulled someone out? I don't know who I am anymore. Not completely. But I know this something ancient lives in my bloodline, a past from mother to daughter. A split. A mirroring that can't exist in the world naturally. One of us must be locked away so the other can survive. That was the rule. That was the cost. And I had broken it. The mirror stayed silent for 3 days. I covered it again, this time with thick blackout cloth, nailed the fabric into the wall, painted over it, and then moved the heavy washing machine in front of it for good measure. I told myself it was enough, that whatever I had let loose was only a hallucination, a byproduct of inherited madness. The women in my family had always carried shadows on their backs. Maybe this was just mine. But every night, I'd hear tapping. Not from the windows, not from the doors, but from inside the walls. Rhythmic, deliberate, patient. And I began to notice my own movements growing strange. I'd catch myself reaching for objects I didn't want, speaking words I didn't mean. And once, I opened my eyes in the garden to find I'd dug a hole I didn't remember digging, 2 feet wide and 6 feet deep. My hands were blistered and bleeding. I had no memory of picking up a shovel. I stopped going outside. I stopped answering the phone, though it barely rang. The house, it seemed, had accepted what was happening, adjusting to it like lungs to smoke. And I realized then, this wasn't the first time. It was a cycle, generations repeating. The photos, the sealed rooms, the silences, all of it was ritual, and I had interrupted it. My mistake wasn't opening the mirror. My mistake was not understanding that in our family, there is never just one. I needed answers. My mother, wherever she was, wouldn't return my messages, and the phone lines had gone quiet again. So I returned to the attic. I brought candles, matches, a crowbar. The air was dense, itchy with dust and old heat. I tore through every trunk, every box, until I found something I must have missed before. A leather-bound journal buried beneath yellowed linens and a child's cracked porcelain doll. The name on the first page was Clara, the forgotten child, the one Lila held in the photo but never spoke of. The entries started innocent enough. Talks of dreams, school, her pet cat Mallow. But the handwriting changed rapidly. The lines became jagged, letters oversized or impossibly small. She wrote of hearing her own voice whispering to her while she slept, of seeing herself move in reflections before she had moved, of losing time, waking up with dirt under her nails, blood on her palms. Then came the final entry. Mother says I must go behind the glass again. I was out too long. She says it's the only way to keep her in. But this time I won't go back. This time, I'll trade her first. The page was torn just after that. There were bloodstains on the corner. I sat in the attic for hours, journal open on my knees, feeling the weight of 100 years pressed down on my spine. Clara wasn't just a child, she was me, or rather, a version of me. A warning, a prototype. And someone had chosen. Lila had chosen. My grandmother hadn't saved her, she had sealed her away. But now Clara, whatever she had become, was free, and she was learning. That night, I watched myself move before I moved. It was subtle at first, my hand reaching for the lamp a second too early, my shadow bending where I didn't. But then I caught myself in the microwave's black door, and my reflection turned to look at me directly before I had moved. It smiled. I screamed. She blinked. That's when I understood. She wasn't waiting in the mirror anymore. She was learning to live in me. I tried to leave. I packed a single bag, got in my car, started the engine, but the wheels spun like they were stuck in mud. The road in front of the house had cracked open, like the earth itself had grown teeth. I reversed, tried the back road. Trees had fallen, perfectly spaced, each trunk carved with my name. The house wasn't letting me leave. Or maybe she wasn't. The reflection was no longer trapped in glass. She had slipped into the floorboards, the wires, the water. She was everywhere. I stopped sleeping again. Sleep meant surrender. Sleep meant opening the door wider. I barricaded the mirrors again, removed anything that could show light bouncing back. But the more I erased the reflections, the more she emerged in other forms. My voice on recordings, footsteps that echoed after I had stopped walking, bruises appearing in shapes I didn't recognize. One morning, I woke to find the furniture rearranged. Every chair turned to face the hall mirror I had long ago destroyed. But the mirror was whole again. Not even taped. Whole. My image stood in it, smiling, not moving, just waiting. A note lay beneath it in my handwriting, though I hadn't written it. You forgot who came first. Oh, and that's when it hit me. This wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a possession. It was a reversal. She was not an accident. She was the original. I was the copy. The doppelganger. The mirrored fragment that was let loose into the world, while she stayed behind, watching through cracks in glass and waiting to reclaim what was hers. Leela had pulled me out. She'd saved me, or thought she had. My mother had tried to continue the ritual by keeping the house sealed, reflections erased, history suppressed. But the moment I questioned it, the moment I tried to confront the truth, I made space for her. I made room for the original. Now she walks the halls with me. I see her in my peripheral vision, flickering like a skipped frame. She whispers to me gently, almost lovingly, "It's okay? You've had your turn." I feel her slipping into my body in tiny moments. When I write, when I breathe, when I stare too long at water and see lips moving that aren't mine, there is no one left to warn me now. No Eleanor. No Clara. They're all fragments now, echoes trapped in the rooms of this house that remembers everything. And I wonder, did they all hear this voice? Did they all face this choice? I've locked myself in the last room with any light. I've set candles around me, old protection tricks I don't know if I believe in. I'm writing this not as a warning, but as a record. Because if I disappear, if someone finds this house and wonders who lived here, which one of us made it out? I want them to know I tried. I tried to remember who I was before she remembered me. And as I write these final words, I feel her in my skin, curling her fingers over mine. My reflection watches me from the window, even though it's dark outside. She's mouthing something now. I can't hear her, but I don't have to. I know what she's saying. Your turn is over. And somehow I think I agree. I don't know how many hours passed after I finished writing the last page. It could have been minutes or days. Time in this house isn't linear anymore. It folds in on itself, like a reflection inside a reflection, spiraling deeper with every breath. I remember falling asleep, or something like it, in that candlelit room. The wax melted down to puddles, the flames flickered out, and in the absence of light, I felt her slip in, not violently, not like a storm breaking through a door, but gently, as though she were returning to a place she'd once owned. I awoke to silence, not the kind that soothes, but the kind that rings like a warning. The house was listening. The air had shifted, warmer somehow, thicker, and the walls, they felt closer. When I stood, my legs didn't feel like mine. My fingers twitched with a will of their own. I walked to the window without meaning to and looked out across the field. Something had changed out there too. The trees were straighter, too symmetrical, like copied versions of each other, as if reality had become a distorted echo. The sky was gray but flat, like paint smeared across glass. I blinked. The field blinked back. And then I saw her, me, standing beneath the largest oak tree, head tilted, hands folded calmly in front of her like she was posing for a portrait. She wore my clothes, my shoes, my scars, but her posture was all wrong, too confident, too still, as if movement was optional. She smiled when she saw me watching. Not a grin, not mockery. Something worse, welcome. I turned away, heart slamming against my ribs, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't sleepwalking. This wasn't dissociation. She was here. Fully. Physically. And if she was out there, it meant I was losing territory inside myself. Every time she appeared in the real world, something inside me went dark, like a room she'd claimed and locked from the inside. I tried to leave again. I packed another bag, didn't even bother with the car. I ran, past the porch, down the gravel path, through the trees. But the further I went, the more the landscape repeated. Same rock, same tree stump, same patch of moss. It looped seamlessly. I kept moving, blood pounding in my ears, until I stumbled onto the back porch again, gasping. That's when I realized I wasn't inside the house anymore. The house was inside me. The next morning, if it was morning, I found another note. Neat, centered on the kitchen table. Written in my handwriting, "Let's talk." No explanation. Just that, and beneath it a set of coordinates. Familiar ones. The coordinates to the old greenhouse behind the property. Collapsed for years, overtaken by vines and rust. My grandmother used to go there late at night. I'd watch her from the upstairs window as a child, wondering why she always returned with dirt on her hands and tears streaking her cheeks. She'd told me it was a place for memory. I never questioned it. Now I had to. The greenhouse wasn't collapsed anymore. Where once it had sagged under years of neglect, now it stood restored. Glass panes pristine, iron framework polished, even the old wooden door freshly varnished. I stepped inside slowly, the air warm, humid, sweet with the scent of jasmine and something faintly metallic. In the center of the room stood a mirror. Not ancient, not cracked, but new. Gleaming. Full length. Framed in gold that shimmered like firelight. And she was already there? My reflection. Only she wasn't a reflection anymore. She stood across from me, separated only by the glass, but no longer mimicking my movements. She was wearing white. My old dress from graduation, the one my mother had sewn from scratch. Her hair was combed, her face serene. She looked like everything I was supposed to be before this house carved a new shape out of me. "I'm not here to hurt you," she said. Not aloud, but directly into my thoughts. The mirror pulsed with light, not from outside, but from within. "I'm here to make you whole." I should have run. I should have screamed. But I couldn't. Because some part of me, some secret, bruised part, believed her. She reached out and placed her hand on the glass. I matched her without thinking, and in that moment, something shifted again. My memories unraveled like film reels spinning in reverse. I saw myself as a child, playing in the garden, but it was her laughter, not mine. I saw Lila crying in the basement, whispering to a mirror, pleading. I saw my mother, young, terrified, pressing a mirror to the floor of the attic, sealing it with wax and blood. I saw myself being pulled from glass like breath exhaled into life. And I saw Clara, standing in the background watching it all. Not dead, not forgotten, waiting. And then I understood. The ritual wasn't about containment. It wasn't about keeping her trapped. It was about choosing. Every generation the house produced a pair. Mirror and flesh, reflection and self. And one had to be locked away so the other could live. Leela chose me. Eleanor chose silence. I had broken the cycle by looking too deeply, asking too many questions. Now, the choice was mine. "I don't want to replace you," she said. "I want to merge." I recoiled, breath catching. What does that mean? But I already knew. The gaps in my memory, the overlap in our movements, the deepening voice inside my mind, the bruises, the lost time, the dreams of drowning in glass. It had already begun. And maybe, just maybe, that was the point. This wasn't a curse. It wasn't even punishment. It was integration. The house, the bloodline, the mirror. It was never about reflection. It was about acceptance, harmony. Fusion. We weren't meant to live apart. We were one being, split by fear, divided by generations of women too terrified to look at what they truly were. I stumbled backward from the mirror, heart thundering, head spinning. The greenhouse dimmed. Her voice faded. That night, I stood in front of the covered mirror in the basement. I pulled the cloth down. I stared into my reflection. No longer smiling, no longer moving ahead of me. Just why raised waiting? This time, she didn't raise hers. Because I had already crossed over. I am both now. I feel her in my thoughts, in the way I move, the way I see. I'm remembering everything not from one life, but from both. The rituals, the choices, the fear, and the longing, the aching need to feel complete. She isn't haunting me anymore. She is me. But something is still wrong. Because now that we're one, now that I understand the truth, I see things I never saw before. Fractures in the world around me, moments that shimmer like broken reflections. The house isn't the only one that mirrors itself. People do too. I see them now. Others. Pairs. Unaware. Waiting for the choice they don't know they must make. Their reflections already whispering behind their eyes. And I realize, this was never about me. It's about what comes next. The moment you become whole is not a moment of peace. It's a moment of dissonance, because the world is not built for dualities. At least not visible ones. We spend our lives editing ourselves, folding the unruly parts away, packaging the darkness neatly into something polite and palatable. But I know now that wholeness includes the pieces we were taught to bury. I am that burial ground. I am what they buried and what rose in its place. After the merging, the house exhaled. You don't know what that sounds like until you've heard it. Timbers moaning with relief, windows humming a low harmony, pipes vibrating as if sighing through metal lungs. The air warmed, the walls straightened. The mirror in the basement remained, but now it only showed me no delay, no mimicry, just one being staring back. And yet, it was not comfort I felt. It was urgency, because the world outside hadn't changed. I had. I left the house on the third day. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't lock the door behind me. The road was open now, unbroken. The forest didn't bend into loops. Time felt like time again, but everything shimmered faintly, like heat rising from asphalt. Distorted, uncertain. The further I walked from the house, the more I saw them. Pairs. They were everywhere. At first, I mistook them for ordinary people. A girl sitting at a caf table, sipping tea, her reflection in the window a split second late, then catching up. A man jogging down the sidewalk, his mirrored image lingering behind a pole, grinning before it vanished. A mother walking with her toddler, and in the chrome reflection of a parked car, the child reached out toward something invisible, something waiting just beyond the glass. They didn't notice. Not yet. But the reflections were growing bold, reckless. Like they'd been waiting centuries for someone, anyone, to open the door. And I had. I hadn't just broken the cycle in my family. I had shattered a barrier that stretched far beyond blood and wood. It wasn't the house that kept her in. It was me, my choice, my curiosity, my refusal to forget. And so now, it spreads. I spent weeks walking the city, mapping it not by streets or buildings, but by distortions. I kept a notebook, sketched faces that looked too familiar, noted timestamps where digital cameras showed images that didn't match reality. There was a pattern, a frequency. The reflections appeared stronger near mirrors that had been broken and reassembled. They clung to antique glass, elevator doors, sunglasses, phones. But the strangest thing of all was that the people being mirrored were empty. Their movements were predictable, their expressions rehearsed. The reflections had more life in them, more intent. And I started to wonder, were we the copies all along? One night, I stayed in a motel on the edge of a quiet town. I checked in using cash. I avoided eye contact with the receptionist. My room had a single mirror, small, cracked above the bathroom sink. I draped a towel over it. Old habits. That night, I dreamt not of myself, but of Clara. She stood in a field of shattered mirrors, barefoot, wearing a dress of smoke and light. Her voice came from everywhere at once. You see it now, don't you? The infection isn't in the glass, it's in the choice. Once one chooses to look, the mirror remembers. I asked her what I had done. She smiled, and behind her, hundreds of reflections shifted into place. Versions of her, of me, of others. Some were twisted, fractured, monstrous. Others were perfect, idealized forms. One stepped forward and whispered, "You freed the possibility." I woke gasping, sweat soaking the sheets. The towel had fallen. The mirror was uncovered. My reflection blinked once, late. I had to return. Not to the house. Not yet. But to the people. To the ones who hadn't yet seen themselves truly, I needed to warn them, or at least observe what happened when they made the choice. I started leaving notes in places with high reflection frequency. Subway stations, dressing rooms, hotel lobbies. I used the same phrase. Do not follow your reflection if it moves first. Most ignored it. Some laughed. A few, very few, reached out. One woman, Maris, met me in a diner after I left a note in her mailbox. She was pale, sleep-deprived, trembling. She said her husband had changed after standing too long in front of their hallway mirror. He was the same, but emptier. He went through the motions, said the right things, but lacked something. Warmth, history. One morning she found him sitting in the dark, whispering to the mirror, saying, "Let me back in." Another man, Jonah, emailed me late one night. He said his twin brother died when they were kids, but sometimes he sees someone who looks exactly like him standing in the reflective glass of the lake near their childhood home, smiling, waiting. And sometimes he hears his voice calling from the water, asking to trade places. He hasn't gone back in years, but lately he dreams of drowning. I collected these stories, but a map. Every story was another crack in the surface of normality. Every person who looked too long gave a little more space for the other to step through. And then I noticed myself changing again. Sometimes I would speak and not remember what I said. Sometimes I'd wake up in places I didn't walk to. I stopped casting shadows at dusk. Birds no longer chirped when I passed. Dogs barked and cowered. Children stared and asked their mothers why. The lady had another face inside her. She wasn't gone, she was dormant. And now she was waking. I returned to the house in late October, the air sharp with the promise of cold. The leaves were brittle underfoot, and the sky hung low, heavy with unspoken things. The door was unlocked. The lights flickered on as I entered. The house knew me again. In the basement, the mirror pulsed faintly behind its curtain. But this time, I didn't uncover it. I stood in front of it and spoke aloud. "I let you out. But what did you really want?" The mirror answered in silence. But in my mind, her voice returned. "To show you what you are. To show them, we are not curses, we are corrections." I laughed, bitter, broken. Corrections to what? To a world that forgot wholeness. A world that locked half of itself away. I left the basement and went to the attic. There I found an old box that hadn't been there before. Inside it, newspaper clippings I hadn't collected, journal entries I hadn't written, all cataloging my journey. Our journey. Down to the exact words. My fingers trembled as I pulled out a final page. Blank, except for one line. When both halves know their whole, the mirror becomes a door. And I knew then this wasn't about reflection anymore. This was about invitation. The mirror didn't just show another side. It offered it. I returned to the greenhouse that night. It was darker now, plants overgrown, the air thick with rot and perfume. The mirror still stood unblemished. My face stared back, calm, collected, but with something other burning in the eyes. She stepped forward. So did I. Together, we placed our hands on the glass. It felt warm. Then it felt gone, because the mirror let us through. They say when you step through a door, you arrive somewhere else. That was a lie. When I passed through the mirror, I didn't arrive. I remembered everything. Not in pieces. Not in distorted flashes or broken recollections, but all at once, like a flood that had waited at the edge of a dam for generations. And the first truth it brought me was the cruelest. I had never been born. I had been summoned. I saw it clearly. My grandmother, Lila, kneeling before the mirror in the basement, the sigils around her painted in her own blood. I saw the ritual she performed the night Clara was taken. She didn't seal Clara in the mirror. Clara was the one who remained whole. I was the thing dragged out, formed from memory and regret, shaped into a child to replace what was lost. I was the substitute for a daughter she couldn't save. I had never been real, and yet I had lived. I had laughed. I had cried. I had suffered. That makes something real, doesn't it? But now, on the other side of the mirror, I saw the cost of my creation. This place, the mirror world, wasn't a separate reality. It was the house's reflection, a dark twin molded from every suppressed thought, every unspoken scream, every generational grief never given voice. The floorboards glistened like wet glass. The walls pulsed like skin. The furniture was twisted, melted versions of what I remembered. It was my home, but distorted, suffocating, hungry. And it was alive. The reflection of me stood beside me now, but we were indistinct. We didn't move separately. We flowed. Merged thoughts, shared intentions, blurred bodies. We had become what the house had been trying to shape all along. A single self that could remember both sides. And we weren't alone. The others were there. All the others. Echoes of families like mine, pairs who had chosen, pairs who had merged, and pairs who had failed. Some wandered like broken dolls, half merged, split at the spine. Some stared into invisible mirrors, waiting to be seen. And some had become something else entirely. Towering things made of whispers and regrets, reflections stretched into impossible geometries. They did not speak. They only watched. Clara was there too. She hadn't aged. She stood in the center of the garden, which here had no plants, only thorny vines that wrapped around gravestones bearing names like Eleanor, Lila, and Rachel. She looked at me. Not the way family looks at you, but like a scientist gazing at a specimen that should not exist. Her mouth didn't move, but her voice echoed through the bones of the world. "You were never meant to be more than a mask," she said. "But you wore it so long, you believed in the face beneath it bought." I wanted to scream, to accuse her, to ask her why. Why make me? Why suffer me to live a life stolen from silence? But the truth was already in me. I hadn't been created out of cruelty. I had been created out of grief. Lila hadn't intended for the mirror to birth a child. She had wanted closure. She wanted to hold Clara again. But the mirror, this place, it doesn't give you what you want. It gives you what you leave behind. Clara reached out, her fingers brushing the side of my face. "You were made from the piece of me I buried to survive." And that's when I understood the final truth. I wasn't a monster. I wasn't even an accident. I was the cost of survival. "You let me out?" I whispered. "No," she said. "You let yourself in." The others began to gather then, reflections folding in from the twisted hallways, from beneath floorboards, from the corners where geometry made no sense. All of them converged around me, silent, watching, breathing as one. The merged ones stood close, their mirrored halves no longer behind glass but stitched into their skin, like tattoos made of light and shadow. They didn't speak, they waited. Because the final ritual was mine. In the center of the mirrored house, where in my world there had once been a fireplace, stood a stone basin filled with black water. I approached it, the crowd parting like leaves before wind. The water didn't ripple. It hummed. I looked into it and saw not myself, but all the versions of myself, every choice I didn't make, every fear I swallowed, every truth I ran from. They stared up at me, pleading. And I understood. If I stepped into the water, I could undo it. Erase the duality. Restore the cycle. Let another take my place. The house would be sealed again. The mirrors would forget. Balance would return. But if I didn't, if I chose instead to remain, to claim my place as both mirror and flesh, then the world would change. The door would stay open. Reflections everywhere would remember they are alive. And the people who never questioned their own shadows would begin to hear the voices behind their eyes. It was a terrible power, and it was already mine. I knelt beside the water. My reflection leaned in. She smiled not cruelly, not with triumph, but with sorrow and love. "We are not punishment," she said. "We are potential." Bob behind me, I felt Clara watching, waiting for my decision. I reached toward the water. Then I stood and turned away. I walked through the mirrored house, slowly, deliberately, passing the others who nodded as I went, not in approval, but in recognition. I was not choosing salvation. I was choosing truth. For all of us, back in the real house, the air was still. I stepped through the mirror into my world as easily as opening a door. The sky was a deeper shade of blue than I remembered. The trees stood straighter. The birds didn't sing, they watched. And everywhere I looked, Windows, water, glass. I saw people beginning to slow down, turning their heads, looking into their own eyes for the first time. And sometimes their reflections didn't move. The world hadn't ended, but it had shifted. I stayed in the house, not because I was trapped, because it was the only place honest enough to hold me now. I began to write. Not warnings, not prophecies, but instructions. I filled notebooks with how to listen when your reflection speaks, how to recognize when it wants to trade, how to live when you both agree to share the skin. Because it's not possession, it's evolution. They will come one by one. The ones who hear the call, who see the flicker, who realize that they are only half of themselves. And when they arrive, I will be here, not as a guardian, as a guide. Because I am not just Rachel, I am what the mirror let in. And so are you. Thanks for watching the video, subscribe, and like the video.